done that okay on the Facebook, but I don't seem to understand whether it's happening or not. So someone will have to tell me whether it's getting cross-posted.
Yeah, it will be. It will be.
Okay.
Um, Ishita, sound check, okay, right?
Yeah, sound check fine, and we're live.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome today to Winning Minds, a part of Women Inspiring Network. We are a series of conversations with content creators, women content creators, who bring their passion, their creativity, their perseverance to the pursuits that they follow, and we try to decode their minds, their journeys, and take inspiration from them. Since its start, Win platform has garnered more than 10 million views, and our aim is really to reach out to young people, young women, with conversations with women achievers so that we can motivate, inspire, have dialogues, and create a pay it forward movement. So, with that, let me welcome our guest today. We've got Kiran Manral, who is the author of 12 books across fiction and nonfiction, and will delve a lot into her journey and into her books. But Kiran started out as a journalist. She's written for multiple magazines, Femina, and many others. She's been a consulting ideas person to many organizations, and she's won multiple awards for her books and long listed for many, many more. So welcome again, Kiran. Wonderful to have you on this show of Winning Minds.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Amrita. Very kind of you to do so, and it's lovely to be in conversation with you because you're someone I've admired. I enjoyed your book, Faking It, and I remember reading Breach back at the time when no one was talking about cybercrime. So lovely to be chatting with you today.
Thank you, and wonderful. So, Kiran, your journey, let's delve a little bit into that before we get into the book writing, because you had a career in journalism before you got into creative writing. So, tell us a little bit about your early influences. Were you always a writer and a scribbler at school, at home? What inspired you to pick up, the pen, and how did then, the journey move ahead?
That's very. You're a writer, Amrita. You know that's a very loaded question. What makes you a writer? It's no one moment, I guess. It's a lifetime of reading, and it's a lifetime of loving the written word and the worlds they take you into. It's also, I think, an innate curiosity and a penchant to keep telling stories. So it starts off when you're very young, and you're grabbing the nearest available audience and making up stories about any incident that has happened and building it up, and then moving on to writing and scribbling your tales. I think my mother has enough raw material to blackmail me for the rest of my life with some terrible poems and stories I've written through my childhood. So the writing was always there, the reading was always there, but the writing of a book kind of got put off until I neared my 40s. And it came about quite by chance. When you're a child, you tell your parent, my mother specifically, that one day I will write a book. So she held that in her heart like a little flowering seed. And every year when the birthday came close, she would say, "So when are you writing your book?" And I said, "No, I'm working in the Times of India. I'm terribly busy and I'm terribly important. I don't have time for a book." Then it went on to I got married and terribly busy, no time for a book, had a kid, no time for a book. Then suddenly it was like, oh hell, I'm hitting 40, I better write that book. So I basically wrote that book to the first book to get my mother off my back, and it's been 2011 December that it came out, and now it's 12 books. So I think mothers can be scary. They can get you to do stuff that you keep putting off.
You know, our mothers lead us into many things, right? Throughout life, it never
And
ends.
absolutely, they unleash us upon the world, and then the world can like it or love it.
That's fabulous. So, what was that moment of writing that first book? Were you still working, or did you have to balance things? The first book, did you have the idea in your head? How did the idea come about?
Very strange. I was not working full time at that point. Me and my husband, we were running an advertising agency, so I was pretty much my own boss, and I you could goof off. So in between briefs for boring stuff like cookers and home appliances, and because we were doing Kensta and Sansui and all those kind of brands and air conditioners, I began scribbling the story about a woman who lived in a gated community, and it pretty much came about from me reading a city brief about a dead body being found on the same back on the back road of the place I lived in at that point. And that sort of spurred my curiosity because that's the road I would go for walks or whatever. I think, oh my god, a dead body found there in the morning. I could have found it. And that's how the first book sort of just came about. It was like a what if I had found the dead body, and it's the first book they say is always pretty much very related to your own life and your own setting. So I think the gated community in Mumbai's mid suburbia, a lot of that came out of that. And then it wasn't a very conscious or very planned book. It just got written. It wasn't structured. There was no skeleton. There was no draft. There were 3 chapters that were sent out to the editor at Westland, Dipti Talwar. She liked it, and then she wanted to see the rest of it, and I hadn't written the rest of it. So then I sat down and wrote the rest of it in a hurry and sent it in. Luckily, she liked it enough to take it on, and I was blessed because my first time was very easy. The second time was very tough because everybody rejected my second book. Every single publisher rejected my second book. So the first book came to me like on a platter. The second book was tougher, and it continues to be. You know it, Amrita. You're in the business. You know how uncertain it is.
Yeah, but it's amazing when the first one really flies out of the door because it gives you so much of pleasure and happiness to actually see your work out there. But you said something very interesting that your the first book was inspired by an incident. So to some extent, the story came first, right? Building on that to Once Upon a Crush and All Aboard, which I think came out at the same time as Zoya Akhtar's movie, right?
Oh, that's a long story. Yeah, yeah.
So how does in general do you look at the story emerges first for you, or do you have a set of characters and the characters then emerge? How does it happen?
For me, it's always the protagonist. The protagonist comes first. Now that you mentioned Zoya Akhtar's Dil Dhadakne Do and Queen,
Yeah, yeah.
they came out, but my premise, my book was commissioned by Vaishali Mathur at Penguin Random House, and she wanted specifically a book set on a Western Mediterranean cruise.
Uh-huh.
I had submitted in my, my first synopsis and chapters and everything, and I was writing it out, and I'd written it out and submitted. Then the Penguin Random House merger happened, and everything got set back by a year and a year and a half, by which time these 2 movies were out. So, and I'm like screaming in the background, I wrote this first. I wrote this first. I wrote this before the books came out. But anyway, that's another thing. That's another long story. So it's always the character, the protagonist. Unless I have the protagonist in place, Amrita, I can't build the story around. So even for my first book, it was this ditzy suburban school gate mom who finds herself in the thick of the action, and placing something that's very antithetical to what you'd expect her to have in her life, which is a dead body and a corpse, and her investigating it, is what led the story forward. For Once Upon a Crush, it was everyone saying that your book, the first book is chicklit, and I'm saying no, it's momlit, it's henlit, it's not chicklit. So I will write chicklit, and what do I write a chicklit about? A single girl living alone in the city, and that's how Reina Day came about. So the story come in fall in place after I have the protagonist in place. For me, that's very clear. Once I have who I'm going to be writing from,
Mhm.
then I build a world around that person.
That's very interesting. Now, as you said, the first book ends up being a little taken from your own life, and then as you proceed, you build along. So as you're crafting your main protagonist, right, what do you draw upon from yourself, what do you draw upon from the world? And you're a woman of many talents and many hats that you wear. So how do you package your protagonist to say, okay, these are the elements, or these are the facets that I want to bring through in this character?
That's a very interesting question, Amrita. I think I don't really think about the facets of a character or what I want to bring out. I primarily want to bring out every woman.
Mhm.
So for Kay, who's here, little book plug, you book plug. So for Kay, who's here, she's every woman. She's every woman who's dropped out of the workforce. She's every woman who is highly qualified but has taken a break to raise a child and trying to find purpose in life. For a book like All Aboard, it's anyone who's been ditched by somebody she loves and is trying to mend a broken heart. For a book like The Face at the Window, it's a retired the protagonist is a retired Anglo-Indian school teacher. She's 78 years old, but she's anyone who's old and alone and just waiting with no purpose to pass away.
Mhm.
So I and it's every woman. I want any woman who reads the book to find within the protagonist shades of herself. So that's, I think, to be very honest, I don't want them to find her aspirational. I don't want them to find her removed from their own everyday lives. I want them to read and say, okay, this could have happened to me, or this is me, or I know somebody like this. That's what I try to do. Tell stories of women.
That empathy with the reader becomes so important, right? To draw the reader in sometimes.
I think we need to tell more stories of women that aren't about women who are like, as I was talking the other day, a bit of wasp and waist and almond eyes and slaying everyone with their looks. We are all regular, everyday people. Let's talk more about us.
I know. And not everyone needs to be sort of facing a lot of injustice and fighting against that either, right? There is a lot of richness in everyday stories, uh, as you're discovering.
Absolutely. For a long time, women's fiction has been relegated to being inferior or not so important, so to say, by a lot of writers because they say that it doesn't represent the human condition, it doesn't take a broader view of the human condition. But what is the human condition? The domestic is is part of the human condition, isn't it? When we're talking about domestic lives, when we're talking about the issues women face, whether it is, you know, um, an unhappy marriage, a childhood which has not been working out, or seeking fulfillment to romance, or the pressures to get married, or perhaps even the pressures to find purpose and not having a career but being judged all the time. These are all important to the women who go through them, even if they're not important, considered important overall. So, once upon a time, they would say Jane Lit was writing chick lit, and she was looked down upon derisively. But today we know that she was making a social commentary on the position of women in those times. So, so when you write, I think if you accurately and with empathy, as you said very rightly, put forth the life of your protagonist, it is something that is very important because you are putting a facet of a human being's life out there for people to read, to understand, to empathize, and to get a different worldview. You're not putting them out there to be judged or to be derided or anything of the sort. In that sense, every piece of writing is important. Every form of writing, whether it's chick lit, whether it's humor, whether it's thriller, as long as that empathy comes through.
Absolutely. And it's these emotions that drive us, right? A lot of life is about emotions, and emotions then come from this really personal space of who we
Absolutely.
are. And with emotions comes the whole idea of voice, and how do you present, how do you write. So do you have obviously you have a quirky style of writing, but do you think how do you actively think about your writing style and the voice of your protagonist, and in different books, how do you make them come out slightly different because they might be like, a young girl versus an older person versus a mother. Like, there is a slightly like nuanced voice that needs to come out. So how do you think through that?
So for me, not just the voices, even the tones of the books are very different. So you may have the Kitty Party Murder, the Reluctant Detective, and Once Upon a Crush, which are very funny books. They're very laugh out loud funny books. Then you might have Saving Maya and All Aboard, which are romantic and intense and written lightly, but they're very intense books. There is some amount of emotion in them. I mean, quite a lot of emotion, but then there is a book like The Face of the Window or Missing Presumed Dead. They are intensely noir books, and the protagonists are very dark and very, there's a lot of despair and grimness in those books. So the tonality of all these books are very different. And you have I go from somebody who's 28 in Once Upon a Crush, or 20 something in All Aboard, to somebody who's 78 in The Face of the Window. There is a vast span of age. There's a 46-year-old in Missing Presumed Dead. So these are different ages of women and different life stages that they are in. So definitely there has to be conscious thought about, what their priorities would be, what they would think like. And I can't presume to think like a 28-year-old anymore. I've been there, but that has been a long time ago, and dinosaurs roamed the earth back then. A lot has changed. So
Those are very different today.
very different. I mean, we had nothing like Tinder, and we had nothing like hookups, and the whole dating scene was very different back then. You waited for years to be introduced formally to somebody, even if you were dying to know the person. Now you just like swipe right. So it's so for that, I think I tend to do a lot of reading up, lot of observing life as the youngsters put forth on social media, and talk to a lot of the kids in that age group, and try and kids, I call them kids, young women in that age group, try to find out what their lives are all about and what their interests are all about, and how do they speak, how do they dress, what drives them. So there is informal research in everything, and one tries to get it right, but one never knows if one has until somebody comes and tells you like, oh man, I thought that was me. So there's always an effort. Yeah.
As an author, that's one of the best compliments that you get, right? That somebody associates and finds themselves in your character and in your book. So that's can be very satisfying, right? Absolutely. So you started talking about research, and talk to me a little bit more about that, because typically in nonfiction there's a lot of research. In fiction, there is a different kind of research about the setting, about the place, about the set of incidents that are happening, and in your case, as you're saying, the protagonist and their specific characters and shades that you need to create. So what is the research that you do into each book? And for you, what is the process like? Do you research as you're writing, or do you sort of have a space and time, a couple of months where you're only researching and toying with an idea, and then you put words onto the screen?
So that's quite a question that I've been grappling with. With nonfiction, it's pretty simple because you get your research done and then you start writing. You have all your facts in place, and you have a huge Google Doc which is like taking up half your comp, and like it goes on forever, and then you start culling it down and putting it all together. So nonfiction is pretty straightforward in that. It's fiction that is tricky, because in fiction you are writing about a specific place, a specific time, a character who is born in and brought up in a different city. Even if you put in a building or a cottage or a bridge or anything, it has to be there. you know uh, so for the face at the window, when I was writing about Calcutta, and she's an orphan, she's brought up in an orphanage in a convent in Calcutta. Then she goes to a tea estate where her grandparents finally find and take her to a tea estate in near Darjeeling. So I had to research all that. I had to research things because this was a different time. When did the trains actually start between Calcutta and Darjeeling, and what was the journey like? how do they have to change? Were there crossings? Were they how what kind of food did they get on the way? These little things I had to find out. When does rain happen in that city, because it's a different timing from Bombay where I live.
Mm, mm, mm.
Then for the books that are set in the hills, I had to write about research about the climate, the cold, the foliage, the local festivals. My greatest compliment came when I think somebody asked me, "So, which boarding school did you go to in Calcutta, in Darjeeling?" And I was like, "No, I visited there for like 5 days when I was in the ninth standard. I've never been there otherwise. I went for 5 days on a school trip." Really? I thought you studied there because of the research. So that was very gratifying for me. For non-fiction, the research is done and you start writing. For fiction, you write and you keep researching, and the two things happen parallelly until you're satisfied that all the details are there, but the details are not overwhelming the narrative. I see a lot of times, they're so proud of their research. I have done so much research. There are chunks of research bunked into the book, regardless of whether it's helping with the flow or not. And you're saying, why? Why? So there's that delicate balance also. You have your research in place. It could be the shade of blue of a wallpaper, or the kind of crockery that is being used, but it's just a mention. It's just there. It's not elaborated on. It may be described, but there's no great detailing. So it's there,
Hmm.
and it existed at that time, but it's not overwhelming the narrative or the flow, not impeding.
It's so important, as you said, like it's like a watercolor. You need to have the light touch. It needs to be there, but it needs to be truthful, right? You need to be truthful to the place or to the time or the person, and that's where this balance that you're talking about, is so critical. To ensure that you don't want to be factually incorrect, even in fiction, but it needs to be part of the story.
Like a watercolor, as you said, like I like that.
Absolutely. So, and you've now written books which are both fiction and non-fiction, right? You've written the book on a couple of books now on parenting, right? So, how was that particular process for you? Was it different? What did you do to plan the non-fiction books? And yeah.
So the non-fiction books, the ones on parenting, I think came about from the unhappy coincidence of being a mommy blogger for the longest time, one of the earliest mommy bloggers. The blog got shut down and became Carving Kids, the book. So that book didn't require any work except for me culling out the blogs and sort of, putting them all together. The other books, the non-fiction parenting books, that is 13 Steps to Bloody Good Parenting. Then there is A Boy's Guide to Growing Up. There is Raising, I'm forgetting all my books. There's Raising Kids.
You're a prolific writer.
Oh, it's just old age. It's just old age. There's Raising Kids with Hope and Wonder during times of pandemic and climate change. So these there is research, there is structure, but there's no, I'm not like sitting on a soapbox and giving advice in any of these. I'm just putting forward experiences, anecdotes, and trying to, say that, hey, this worked for me, or this is something maybe I think we should try. And with the 13 steps, that came about purely because Ashwin Sanghi is a dear friend and a wonderful author. He said, "I'm doing this series and I want you to do the parenting book with me."
Hmm.
Like, Ashwin, I'm not a parenting expert. He said, "I don't need a parenting expert. I need somebody who can write on parenting." And of course, I can't say no to Ashwin. So that's how I did that book. A Boy's Guide to Growing Up came about when my son started hitting his adolescence and he had so many questions. So a very dear friend Priya Ramani was at Juggernaut at that time, and she said, I think she saw my tweets and stuff on the timeline, and she said, "Why don't you write this book for us?" And so I did. The Comeback hasn't read it as yet, and he's like almost past adolescence now. So that book is done. Um, and the most recent one came about due to the pandemic, because there are so many questions, and we ourselves are in such a confused state as adults. I can only imagine what the kids are going through. And these questions keep worrying me about the kind of world we're leaving behind to our kids. And so when I did, my editor at West End, Karthik, who had also edited, Karthik Venkatesh, who had also edited 13 Steps, said, is there something you want to write about, something non-fiction for an e-book? And I suggested that they liked the idea, it was topical at the time. That's how it came about. So very simple, actually.
So let's pause on those two for a minute. The one about boys, because there's a lot that gets written and talked about the girl child. And increasingly, there is an equal, set of books who are talking about, should boys cry? Should you raise an emotionally, uh, aware boy child? So there are many nuances of raising, boys. First of all, were you targeting the teen readers, or were you targeting parents with that book? And then, tell us a little bit about the messaging, in there, and what you felt was really important for people to know.
So this book I was targeting purely the boy, the teen,
Okay.
and it was based purely on biological changes and hormonal changes that they would undergo for them to understand what they were going through, because a lot of it is pretty confusing. And I know that my son is still struggling. How much daddy I have, and all that. Is everything fine with me? So all these questions, and everyone's scale is different. So there, he was in his 10th, and there were some of his friends with like lush beard and like towering over him, and he was this little grunt and very worried about, I'm not growing, I'm not being puberty, what I'll do. So all those fears, I wanted to assuage them with other boys as well. That don't worry, it will all happen at its own time. It's a different time scale for each one of you. So that was what the book was about. But in my columns, Amrita, I've spoken a lot about the need for us as parents to talk about consent, to talk about toxic masculinity, to talk about agency, bodily agency, to teach boys, not to teach, to be respectful of the women around you, because they will pick up on the way you behave and things like that. I think we, as you very rightly said, we spend so much time on the messaging for girls. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't go out late, don't dress like this, don't do that. All we need to do is to teach our boys agency, respect, consent, to tackle the toxic masculinity, because even the boys suffer. I mean, boys are scared of being emotional, boys are scared of being perceived as feminine. I mean, if I forget who said it, but this is very powerful quote which says, if the worst thing you can tell a 12-year-old boy is don't be like a girl, what are we conveying to him about a girl, being a girl? So this kind of messaging we need to stop, we need to tackle, and if we can't do it as a society, if society is not sending out the proper messages, as parents, as individuals, let us do it ourselves. Let us start countering it, even if it means like cartoons, for instance, something like a Doraemon would have all the boys sitting down very cushily, and the little girl Shizuka coming in with the tea and the snacks. And I'm like, why is she bringing it? Why are those guys sitting down? Krish, this is not how it should be. Everybody has to bring their own stuff. Keep countering the messages, because it's very insidious, it's very all pervasive, and I mean, just talking about it helps.
No, it's so much more critical, because sometimes we think that it will come from school, it will come from society, but it has to begin at home, and it has to begin with, how we behave inside the home, and what sort of, reminders we keep giving them, because it's I mean, the world is different, both from, as you rightly said, boys also are very conscious of what they look like, what they, how they are perceived. So from the mental health angle of boys as well, to, how they associate with others. Couldn't agree more with you on that. Now tell me a little bit about the latest book that you have, which was about, pandemic, and sustainability is something that I see all youngsters at least, talk about, and till they enter the workforce, or, even till the early years of the workforce. I don't know when the transition happens to I mean, I think life and capitalism takes over at some point of time, but at least, in school and college and in early adulthood, these are climate change and sustainability are things that kids are thinking about a lot, right? So where did the idea for climate change come from, and what was the message that you were trying to give around it?
I think it comes from me worrying about, is there a plan B for us? I am a total science fiction freak, and I keep reading up about. I mean, I could talk to you about Fermi's paradox. I could talk to you about Proxima Centauri and the space arcs and all that kind of stuff. And it worries me because I know and I've read up, and we are seeing it happen all around us. The ice shelves are thawing, climate change is happening. Uh, Everything is just sort of collapsing, and I worry because all the prediction models seem to be accelerating. What will the world be like by the time my son is an adult? And I kept worrying about this. In a city like Delhi, even stepping out of their houses like smoking 20 cigarettes a day, it set me off to really research on the effects of pollution and climate change on us as a people. And it scared me because it affects everything from your it it even goes down to the womb. Children in the womb are not immune to pollution. It has crossed the fetal placental barrier. So your particles of carbon and soot go into the fetal brain. I mean, not the brain, into the fetal system, and that's scary because we are altering ourselves with pollutants, and we're not taking it seriously. There's so much instability happening in the world. All our carbon sinks are being taken away, they're being destroyed. We're having the Amazon burnt down, and this was a time when we had wildfires raging everywhere from California to Australia to the Amazon. This got me very concerned, and I began researching up more about stuff. I think I came from a place of concern that there's no plan B, and the kids are worried, but how do we redress this with them, because we don't have the answers ourselves, and we have no clue where we're headed. We can do all the talking that we like, but the fact remains that we are hurtling towards some sort of crisis, and it's there. We are on the track. The train is coming towards us, and all these talk about reducing emissions, etc. It's just like a drop in the ocean. What the kids are aware, they know, they're activists. Some of our biggest activists are children. We have Greta Thunberg, we have Ridhima Pandey from India, who was just named in the BBC 100 yesterday. But what do we offer them? They are raising their voices, they are concerned, but as adults, we've made a mess of things. So I think what happens, they're worried, they're concerned, that they get sucked up like we did into the day-to-day grind of earning a living, of of being responsible citizens of this world, and sustainability and all that is comfortable and convenient as far as it comes to carrying a cloth bag and doing away with plastic bottles and getting glass bottles. But conversations, I think that's what I want to do. I want to keep the conversations going, even with the kids, with the adults, in whatever way, with the parents, because when you start as a parent, you start walking the talk. That's how the kid understands. So it was just that, keeping the conversations going and getting us informed that A, there's no plan B, B, we better pull up our socks and in whatever little way we can do.
I don't know whether it's facetious to say that, but is the plan B Elon Musk? We shall colonize outer space and find another.
Even by the time we terraform Mars, you and I will be long dead, Amrita. So there's no plan B for us. Maybe our children might go there, but uh,
But
it will take
absolutely,
generations and generations to actually, have a functional. We can have human beings seeding the intergalactic space, but that's going to be generations down the line. Right now, right here, we don't know what's going to happen.
no, and it's critical that it's about changing behaviors, right? And that's the most difficult thing. I mean, even this year, if you think about it, with all the awareness that uh, really has been drummed into us in the last 2 to 3 years about okay, don't burn the rice crops, don't light Diwali lamps. At least in Mumbai, it was a lot less, but Delhi, I mean, if you hear about the news, the emissions, it's been crazy, right? So the messaging does not seem to help change behavior, and you don't know what will.
But I don't despair, you know. Just to give you an example, my husband is very old school, and every year during Diwali, he used to get those huge, annoying, infernal things called lads,
Okay. Yeah.
20,000 ki lad or something that went on forever and deafened everybody in the neighborhood. And I kept telling him, like, what is the need? You're burning money. It's ridiculous, this and that. Then my son, when he was small, he was like, yay, and all that. As he grew and he got the message in school that little kids were, making these firecrackers in Sivakasi, that this is not good for the environment and this is not, we can celebrate Diwali in a nicer way and we don't need to do this. He put his foot down. And this was a good many years ago. He's 17 now. I think by the time he was 7 or 8, he put his foot down and said, I don't want to burst crackers, Papa. And we haven't burst crackers since then. We light Diwali lamps. He might, when he was smaller, he might have taken a full jari or something. But that's the extent of it. So I think change can come. The kids, there's hope from the kids. As adults, we are not, doing our bit, but the kids might just save us.
Absolutely. Definitely, that's the hope. But coming back to your, writing process a little bit, Kiran. So, you said that the first book, it came out in a stream. But how do you typically write? Do you have multiple drafts? Do you edit yourself? Do you have and the first one also, you mentioned that you didn't really have a plan for it, you just wrote. But typically after that, do you plan your books? Do you have, chapters and outlines? What's that process for you?
Amrita, they say that there are two kinds of writers. There's the gardener and there's the architect.
Mhm.
So the gardener just sort of puts the seeds back, waters everything, and just sees how things grow, prunes it, fertilizes. And there's the architect who has everything, all the blueprints ready and everything in place before even the foundation is set. So the two ways of writing. There's one where you put in your main themes or your main protagonists and you let the plot grow organically and you write organically as it comes to you. And there's one where you have everything in place. You have your character sketches, you have your plot, you have your chapter wise synopsis, you have everything. So writing just becomes basically a fill in the blank kind of exercise. And you have your, you have your character, you have your plot arcs, you have where each jump is going to happen and stuff like that. So I've written both ways. I've written as an architect and I've written as a gardener. What is more creatively satisfying? Writing as a gardener. What is more difficult? It is writing as a gardener. What is more time efficient? It is writing as an architect. Because you know what is coming and you know exactly where you're heading to and you know you're not going to waste time. Writing as a gardener is the most frustrating thing because you're writing and then something doesn't work and you delete chunks of it, you go back and but it's also the most delightful because your characters do what they please. You have no clue where your book is going to end or when it is going to end and what point it's going to end and how your characters will take to something or do something that's completely not what you thought they would. So for books like All Aboard, which was a commissioned romance, I knew exactly where it was heading. I had the chapters in place. Even Saving Maya, which was a commissioned book, a second chance romance, I knew exactly what was going to happen and I wrote it accordingly. But a book like The Face of the Window or The Kitty Party Murder or even Missing Presumed Dead, these I let the characters do what they want. And they had a right. I mean, The Kitty Party Murder, Kanan Mehra has a right. She just goes on her own trip for The Face of the Window and Missing Presumed Dead. I had no idea what my characters would do. And they did things that I really thought they would not do. But that's the fun of it, I guess.
It's amazing when your own characters surprise you because even though they emerge from your mind,
Yeah.
they are such fully formed entities that they have a mind of their own and a path of their own, right? And yeah, and I think it's a negotiation that you have to do with your own character to take them this way, let them go, meander, right?
There's no negotiation. Once they're fully formed, Amrita, they will do what they want to do. And if you try to force them in a certain way, it will not ring true when you read it. So it's best to just let them have their way and write them out as truthfully as they want to be written out. Otherwise, you're imposing, you're being puppeteer, which you should not. You should let them live their lives.
So that brings me to the other thing, because you did say that character for you comes first, right? But you also have, like, like a story in mind. What happens, like, what do you do when your character is doing something which is going to deviate from whatever storyline that you had? How do you tackle that moment?
So, with books that are planned and commissioned, the characters have no option. They have to do what I've told them to do. Because, I mean, I have a deadline and I have to submit it in by X, by this number of months. I can't take the risk of them running off and doing as they please. And but with other books where they're not commissioned and they're indulgences of writing, I let them do what they please and it comes out beautifully. When you let your characters do what they want, it comes out much more beautifully than what you could have imagined them to be doing. So it just depends on the kind of book, I think.
And what's your process of being persistent about writing? Because they say, like, you should write your uh, at least, like, 3 pages a day minimum, and so on, right? Like, so do you write every day? Do you write, like, 9 to 5? Do you treat it like a job? Do you write anytime? Like, what's the what's your routine, writing routine?
So I currently I don't do any full time work, so I have the luxury of writing through the day if I please. But when I did have work, my writing browsers were also open continuously. So it was like 15 minutes between calls or between, editing, doing something. I would go to my manuscript and process and do something with it. The thing is, I think, Amrita, it's to be in touch with your work every single day. Don't give yourself deadlines. I have to write 1,000 words a day. I have to write 2,000 words a day. I have to write 5,000 words a day because that takes away from the joy of creating. But be in touch with your work every day, even if it means going back and removing a comma or a full stop or changing a word or two, but just staying in touch with your work and writing it or revising it or editing it. That's important because all these things add up in the end. I mean, right now I'm working on three simultaneous manuscripts, and they're all three completely different, and it's great fun because the one is a funny caper. It's it's like I'm working on another story with Kanan Mehra, and it's a total fun laugh riot. And there's a very serious surrealistic fiction which is dark and which is grim, like the face of the window and missing presumed dead in that space. And there's a non-fiction commission work which I'm in the last stages of final editing and finally putting all the notes together and stuff. So they're very three very different books, and it's great fun to be three different voices, three different kind of writing, and I think that's the challenge of it. If you call yourself a writer, you should be able to do it. So,
Like, you have to we all multitask in so many different dimensions, so why not?
absolutely. And if you call yourself a writer, you can't say that I will write when the mood takes me, because then you are a hobbyist. If you are a professional writer, you will put your seat to butt and write every single day or edit every single day. I don't say writing words, but anything, just work on your manuscript, work on your work.
And I think that what you talked about, like, staying with the flow is very important, because it takes time to sort of enter that space and exit that space. So if you leave a gap, then it just becomes, like, that much more, like, sort of disjointed, so to speak, to get back into the space and then restart. But what is your, typically, you take a few months to write your book, like, you take a year to write your book, like, how long does it take?
It varies depending on the kind of book. So I've written some books in embarrassingly short time. Like my first book was written, I think, in a month or 4 weeks or something like that. Then there have been books which have taken 4 years or more to just write, and then forget about hunting for a publisher and getting it out. So, and there's the Surreal book which I'm working on, which is now in its third year and umpteenth draft, and I'm still not happy with it. So, there are some books which take years, there are some books which take months. It just depends on the kind of book. So, when I'm writing as an architect, the books are faster. When I'm writing as a gardener, the books take years.
you just mentioned, that the entire process of working with publishers is also different, right? Because you've got to find the publisher first and the right publisher for the right book. But then there is their viewpoint on the book, on the characters, on the flow, on the story, and you have to merge those two. Like streams of consciousness, or points of view, as you do the editing. So what has been your experience both in finding different editors for different books, and you working through the styles of different editors?
I think, touch wood, I've been blessed with wonderful editors who've all been very kind and sweet and encouraging. I would be miserable if I had to work with somebody who was none of the above. I would probably say, I don't want to bring this book out, I'm done with it. But luckily, I think it's a tough job to be an editor because we writers are so high strung and we're so emotional and we're so invested in our stories. So I've been very lucky. There's been Vaishali Mathur. Pitti Talwar who was my first editor at first and was a darling, an absolute darling. So she gave me my first break and she sort of unleashed this monster on the world. Then Vaishali Mathur at Penguin Random House, wonderful. Prerna Gill, who's edited my latest book, The Kitty Party Murder. She was most efficient and most kind and most thorough. And, I'm a very, the God will see the details kind of a writer, but I need my editors to pick out wherever I have sort of goofed up. And she was wonderful with that. And Vaishali Mathur at Penguin, who commissioned All Aboard, wonderful editor. Rashmi Menon at this is my thank you speech to all of you guys at Amaryllis, who I gave all my dark, broody books to because she gets them. She totally gets them. So she has The Face at the Window, she has Missing Presumed Dead, she has the forthcoming More Things at Heaven and Earth. And only Rashmi will get those books because she understands how I write them and she totally gets under the skin of my characters. So those books go to Rashmi only. So the process is, I think, to find somebody who respects you as a creator. You often don't have a choice because you get signed up with a publishing house, and it's luck by chance whoever gets assigned to you. But I've been lucky enough to get wonderful editors, and I'm blessed for that.
That's really fantastic, because it's such a close knit relationship with your editor, that it's not just it's the synchronicity, so to speak, of mind and ethos, and a shared motivation that you need for that journey to be successful and fruitful. But tell me a little bit about the different publishing houses, and your experiences, and you've also done books which are digital only, right, versus books which are sort of plus print. So any special nuances when you are writing digital only, and any special nuances when you're approaching a publishing house versus another publishing house?
So the digital only books have all been commissioned. So it wasn't like I approached them. Strangely enough, when I think of it, A Boy's Guide to Growing Up, True Love Stories, now Raising Kids with Hope and Wonder, all three were commissioned. So I wrote them for digital, but I didn't really consciously write digital or approach digital. It just happened. Uh, well, writing for print, see, earlier I would write my book or write my premise and send it out and check, is anybody interested in me? And then wait patiently for the response. Now, thankfully, I have Surreal Mathur at the Book Bakers who does that job for me with my commercial fiction. My literary noir I give to Rashmi, as I said, she takes that, so that goes directly to her. So that takes a weight off your head if you have somebody to do that chasing and to do that running around, because it's and not to see the rejection letters. So you don't get to see those. It's a very blessed space to be in.
Yes, handle all that. Yeah.
But for aspiring writers, because I think this is very important, I think as I mentioned, my second book didn't get any takers at all. I approached almost every publisher possible and nobody wanted that book. But and At an event, I met Ashwin again, Ashwin Sanghi, and I told him I don't think I'm cut out to be a writer. Nobody wants my second book, and he almost yelled at me and said, "No way! You keep sending it out. Send it out to everybody. People will take it. Somebody will take it, but you don't stop writing because you're a good writer." And I think that sort of spurred me on, and I went to Leeds. Leeds that was the only one that accepted that book, but I kept writing after that, and I think that was a lesson I needed to know that it's not personal. It's not you as a writer. Sometimes some books take a lot more work to get out there. Sometimes some books have it easy, like my first book did. And every book will find its space on the bookshelves of the world. Just trust your work and keep writing. Do your homework. If you're going to send a kind of book that a publishing house doesn't normally publish, they won't be interested in it. So see what kind of books they're publishing and send your manuscript accordingly. Most luckily in India, we you don't need to be represented in order to approach a publishing house. You can cold call and send in your manuscript, and wait for the response. I mean, it'll be on the slush file, but they've found some wonderful writers that way. And the other option is to self-publish, which a lot of our best-selling authors have done. They've self-published. Ashwin did that. Amish did that. Savi Sharma did that. They self-published, and then when they built up enough traction and enough of an audience, traditional publishers came to them. Uh, or even if you start with a small publisher, for instance, Preeti Shenoy started with Shrishti Publications, which is not a which is an old established one, but not like a big multinational publishing house. It's an homegrown publishing house. She's one of our best-selling authors today. So is Durjoy Datta, Ravinder Singh. They're all the biggest authors today, and they all started with Shrishti. So your book will take you places if it's written, I think, with honesty, empathy, and it has an audience. It has people who would read it. Don't lose faith in yourself. Keep sending it out. We have enough and more examples of books that have gone. I mean, the latest Booker, it was rejected like some 20 times. So uh, just keep sending your manuscript out and have faith in your work. But make sure it's the best work you send out. Don't send out shoddy stuff, unproofed stuff, grammatically incorrect stuff. Send out your best stuff.
So true. And today, like I think, given social media and all the digital platforms that we have, there is such an amount of creativity in so many different formats that are being unleashed. So it's about giving into your inner creativity and seeing where it goes in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Social media is a blessing and a it's a blessing and a pain, I think, because it can suck you in and it can be pretty time consuming. And sometimes I wonder if we weren't better off in the days when writers lived in our ivory towers and only, did our books and sent them out. And
Live on an island in a hut.
yeah, I lived in our little silos very happily. But yes, social media is a wonderful, wonderful way to connect with your readers apart from your books, to respond to them. It gives you direct contact with them. It also puts you in touch with a host of other people in the creative space. It's a very fertile, fecund space to be in. As long as you're using it, I think, right, and being detached enough for it, it's very easy to get into slinging matches and opinion slugfests. So I think a judicious amount of self censorship is required for, to be on social media these days. Yeah.
It can be a toxic space for sure. But today, marketers, books and authors are required to be marketers more than anything else,
Yeah.
right? And what is your take on that? Because you've successfully created your author persona, and you've taken your books to different platforms. So how do you do it? What is the magic in there? What's the method? What's the magic?
I don't think there's any method or magic. It's just that I was on the social media platforms a long time back. I was amongst the earliest bloggers in the Indian blogging space. I was one of the leading mommy bloggers. I was one of the leading personal bloggers, blogs on the top blogs of India for the longest time. So I was part of the digital online space for the longest time, and this sort of translated into me being pretty popular on Twitter because I was too opinionated and I was there all the time. So you can't create your social media persona only to market your books. No one cares. You have to be an individual with an opinion that you know, or a point of view, or have enough conversations, have people emotionally invested in you, in talking to you, in following you, in listening to what you have to say, then perhaps they might pay a little attention when you say, hey, I've got a new book out. Do you want to read it? Otherwise, they don't care. So I think the greatest mistake that most people make is going out there and, saying, hey, this is my book, buy it. No one cares. If you don't have the conversations and if you don't have the relationships with them. For me, when I had my first book out, my biggest cheerleading squad was the mommy blogger community. So I had a ready audience out there because they knew my writing, they knew my style, they were invested in me. I was one of them. So I owe them a lot because they got the word out for me. And now people are paying like good money to have people review their books and stuff like that. I didn't have to do anything like that because there were people who knew me, were friends with me, they were invested in my story. So I say don't look at it as purely marketing. Look at it, I mean, this is a cliche and every marketer says that as building relationships. So build relationships, have conversations, then perhaps slide in, this is my book. Do you want to read it? So that's what will work. That's hard sell never works.
You have to look at the longer term engagement, rather than a short term transaction that you can do online. Um, and that actually, is a very nice time to talk about your latest book, Polymerus, and why we should read it. What's the fun in there, and I'm assuming it's one of the lockdown books. So yeah, tell us a bit more about that.
Okay, so here it is. It's called the Kitty Party Murder. It's coming reversed on your screen, but Gul Pinagan's written a lovely blurb for it. She says it's smart, satirical, and sharply observed. And Kiran Manral brings her trademark humor to social commentary. So don't go in there expecting, a crime thriller. No, it's not. There are dead bodies, there are murders, there's a suicide, but it's not a crime thriller. It's a comic caper, more so to speak. It's a hilarious book. It's about woman who is asked to infiltrate into a kitty group because somebody has passed away due to suicide, but the husband is not sure what it is. And what happens, it's a very suburban schoolgate mommy looking for purpose, looking for solutions, looking to quiet the inner monologue in her head. It's a very fun read. I recommend you read it purely because these are dark, dire times, and you all need some good laughs. So it will definitely cheer your mood. Do not drink liquids while reading it. Not a good idea. You might end up snorting it all out. So that's the book, and that's why you should read it because these are dark times, and we all could do with some laughs.
Couldn't agree more. I think, yeah, we need levity in life at the moment and some fun and humor. So we're coming towards the end of our hour, Kiran. So as we reach towards that, you did talk a little bit about what should young writers do, but talk to us a little bit more about what should an aspiring writer think through, not just from the writing perspective, but also should they balance their regular career and paths with writing. How should they treat writing as a career?
I would say if you are lucky enough to have a job, hold on to it because writing will not pay your bills. I am privileged enough to not, to be a, as I keep saying, a kept woman. So the husband pays all the major bills. Otherwise, on my writing, definitely it's a luxury and a privilege. Do not give up your job. A minute few folks can survive on being full-time writers, and those are the absolute top bestseller writers, the J.K. Rowling, or your Chetan Bhagat, Amish, but they're just like a fraction of the infinite number of us who become writers. You can earn a living from writing because if you don't think of it as making money just from your books, if if you're writing other stuff, if you're doing corporate writing, if you're doing advertising writing, if you're doing screens and screenplays, scripting, that's where you can make your money. But writing is a passion, and it should be a profession. It should be a profession you can survive on, but unfortunately, that is not the case. We recently had a very telling Twitter thread where very famous uh, and awarded writers like Meena Kandaswamy spoke about the kind of advances they got, and it was appalling because these are not levels to live on. So writing is not a very hyping profession, despite all the glamour that it may seem on the outside. I would say write on the side until you are making enough from your royalties to quit your job. Don't ever quit your job. We have Ravi Subramaniam, who is one of our best selling authors in the country, who's still in a very senior post at Sri Ram. So, Ravi always says that he's not going to quit writing until he's making more money from his writing than from his job. I think that's very sensible of him. Having said that, I do understand, that the passion for writing can be a little dulled by the pressures of a day job because you're constantly, I mean, the mind space is very different. You're constantly dealing with different things, and it's not a very creative space. So then you have to make a choice. Or you can save up enough to take time out for a couple of years and write your book, and then take a sabbatical to write your book, and then come back to the workspace. So these are choices you need to make. I think just be very prosaic and practical. Uh, Follow your passion, but make sure you have food on the table, is what I say.
Yeah, I guess Karan Bajaj is a good example of quitting, joining, writing
Joining it.
between, right? So yeah.
Yeah, man. And he's on the news these days for all. Also,
Yeah. So as we wrap up, Kiran, first of all, it's been really wonderful to have you here. But before we end, we would like to have one last message from you because there's a lot of girls and women that we hope to reach, young girls and young women. And you've really crafted a very broad and rich life with your career as a journalist, with your career as an author, as a TEDx speaker, as somebody who voices her opinions on many things. So what is your message to the young girls of today as they look at their lives and crafting their own lives?
oh man, what is my message? I I don't know if I have a message, but I would just like to tell all to say something that I wish I had been told earlier, that you are enough. Don't ever go telling yourself you are not enough, you're not thin enough, you're not good looking enough, you're not clever enough, you're talented enough. These messages get internalized so badly that we're constantly putting ourselves down. Constantly, as girls and women, we're taught throughout our lives from our very childhood that we are not enough. You are enough. You're enough and more. Believe in yourself and be very selfish about what you want. The day we start being selfish is the day you'll conquer the world. I learned that very late when I hit 40. Please learn this lesson earlier.
Thank you so much, Kiran. It's been really wonderful chatting with you. The hour flew by.
Thank you so much for calling me Amrita. It was a delight.
Thank you. And with that, thank you so much to have watched this segment of Winning Minds. See you again. Bye.
Bye bye.